You all know how well Genera operates on its own, but did you know is another way to launch processes and get information from Genera using other interfaces? It's called the Remote API plugin, and it opens new ways for users to be more productive with Genera, and we're going to cover it right now on Genera Gems. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Genera Gems. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Igor.
Well, good. Thank you for joining us all. Today, we're talking about something pretty cool. It's called the Remote API, and it allows more access to Genera software, and it allows you to launch processes, get information, and do a lot of things. And I think Igor's got something pretty cool to show us today. So, Igor, what I'm going to let you do is take control and show us what you have.
Yep, thank you, Jeff, for that. And I'll go ahead and share my screen. Yeah, very excited to show about our Remote API. Definitely a more advanced feature, but still very useful. So I'm going to open up Genera, and as always, we start in our scheduler view, which we like to call our dashboard view. And we're first going to walk you through how to activate the Remote API, because in the initial install of Genera, the Remote API isn't inherently there. So to do so is we're going to go to our Tools menu, go into Manage Packages, and we're going to install an update. And then we're going to browse for our Remote API package. So this is something that can be asked from us, and then we're going to install this. Install. So it's going to take some time to install. And after it's finished, the Remote API should be up and running from the start. So to double check and make sure that the Remote API is running, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over to the left here. I'm going to share both screens, my Internet Explorer and also Genera. And I'm going to type in localhost :8086. So we run in the Remote API on localhost, and we run it on port 8086. And if I run this, we should see our Swagger documentation. And once this loads up, we could see that as long as this opens up, then you know that you installed the Remote API correctly. And as you can see here, we have a lot of different RESTful commands. So Remote API allows you to send RESTful commands such as posts, gets, patches, or puts. And we can get information back from Genera after sending these commands. So, for example, if I was to run this get states for the instruments here, and you could run all of these commands through the Swagger docs as well. If I execute, as we can see down here, we're actually going to get a 401 error. So we're going to get a no session ID. So what this means, if you ever see this error, is you're not logged in through the Remote API. So the Remote API does follow authentication rules set in the user management of Genera. And so this is a separate, so even though I'm logged in, as we can see in the top left or top right of Genera, it says I'm logged in, but I'm not logged in through the Remote API. And so to do so, I need to run my login command. And if I was to go to try it out, so I'm going to enter in my default username and password, so which is admin and Genera. And once I execute this, we could see that I have a 200 code. That means it's successful. And now if I was to run my get states again, we could see that I actually now could get the states of all the instruments. So we can see the response body here.
Yeah, and you can confirm the uninitialized just by looking at the Genera interface, because there's all the instruments are grayed out. So that's a real quick tell right there.
Exactly. So we could see that it's communicating successfully and it follows all the admin rules.
That's
or the
awesome.
user
So
management rules.
yeah, that's cool. So what else can it do for me here?
Yep. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through a process and show you how we could do that through the remote API. So the first thing we have to do before running our process is initializing the instruments that are part of that process. And to do so, if we go under our instruments, so instead of getting the state, we're going to set the state of an instrument, and we're going to try it out. So we're not going to need these two commands. We're just going to need the mode and the initialized. So we wanted to, so the first parameter here, so this is a JSON text here. And so the first one is initialized, and we want to set this to true because we want to initialize it. And the mode, in this case, we wanted to set it to simulation because we don't have a live instrument with us. And here's where we set the instrument name. So for my process, if I go to my editor tab, I have a simple read process that will just move a plate from hotel 1. So I have my labware node here, which is set to the location of hotel 1. As we can see here, so ReadySoft-hotel 1, and we're going to move the plate to my reader. We're going to read the plate, and we're going to move it back to the hotel. So we obviously need to initialize the arm to move the plate, and then the reader to read the plate. So to initialize the arm, so if I go back to my scheduler view, it is called my flex-1. And when I execute this command, as you'll see, it's not grayed out anymore. And if I go to my instrument control panel and go to the flex, as we can see here, it is initialized. And then
Very
the next one I want
nice.
to read, the next one I want to initialize is my Synergy Neo-1. We're going to execute, and as we can see here, down here, it's not grayed out anymore. And if we go to here, we can see that it's initialized. So now we have our instruments that is part of my process here initialized.
That's also worth taking note that what you did for the flex-1, which was the same name, string name that we had in the actual instrument, even though that was the instrument, on the reader-1, that's not the name you used. You used the instrument name that came from the instrument control panel or the drop down that you showed. So you
Yep,
can name those nest positions anything you want as long as they're associated to the device. But the Synergy-Neo-1 was the name.
that is correct. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add labware to our workspace. Because as you can see for ReadySoft-hotel 1, there's no labware here. And so to do so, we're going to go under our workspace dropdown, and we're going to see here we have an add labware post. And so we're going to click on try it out. And so you have to input all this information to add a labware. So I have it already pre-filled. So I'm just going to copy it from here. I'm going to paste it. And so for this JSON here, we have to specify the definition of the labware. So which labware we're going to use. So in this case, I'm going to add my microplate-96 plate. The parent is where am I going to add it. So my Eliza demo is the name of my layout. The ReadySoft Hotel-1 is the name of the hotel that I'm going to add it to. And then which shelf am I going to add it? Is it going to have a barcode? So I just want to call it plate 1 as my barcode. Does it have any properties? So labware properties. So for this specific labware, we have a parts number, and we're going to set it to 456. And then does it have any operation or statuses? So in this case, we're going to set them both to null, so it has a none operational status. And if I was to run this, as we could see, it added a plate into the first shelf.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, it's important to understand where definition actually came from. That's part of the project. So the microplate-96 is what's in the project that you actually have, and you can show that right there. So that name is the definition of that particular plate. So Igor's correct.
Yep. And then if I want to add a second plate into the second shelf, then I could just change the parent parameter and then my barcode parameter And then I could execute this again. And as you can see, it added a second plate.
Now, if you double click on that, does it show the properties part number?
Yep,
There
it
you
does.
have
So
it.
you can see they're both set to 4, 5, 6,
Very nice. So
and an operational status of none.
yeah, and all those properties are if you have, again, going back to the project, if you have labware with some sort of properties that you've defined, you can set those through the remote API plugin, which is pretty neat.
Yep. And if I was to reset, as you can see, we could have multiple properties we could set for a
Mm.
single barcode. It doesn't just have, or for a single labware, it's not just one property, but you could set multiple of them.
Yeah, I could see a connection to some sort of single source of truth information, limbs, whatever you want to call it, providing plate information, looking at these JSON tags, if you will, definition, parent, barcode, properties, operational status, those types of things, and submitting it to the remote API and saying, this is the labware that you're going to deal with for this next run. So this is very powerful.
Yep. And I could confirm that all my labware are in the correct position is if I was to get all states, if I was to execute this, we could see that we have a plate in parent shelf 1 and plate in shelf 2. So we could confirm that we have 2 plates that are in the specified locations.
So you could kind of use this as if I were a developer writing some sort of overlay on top of the API here. You could use this as a check. Did the labware go where I told it to?
Yep. And you could also get the labware ID here, which is useful for other commands. So if I was to scroll up and if I was to minimize this, where we could get a specific labware based off of that ID. We could remove that specific labware, or we could set the labware state based off the ID. So that's
Oh,
useful to
okay.
get the states. So to get that specific ID for that specific labware. So now that we've added the labware, so now we're going to actually run our process. So if we go to our scheduler dropdown and we click on process tasks, or scheduler dash process task endpoint, which it will create a process task. Click try it out. We can see what parameters are required for to create that process task. So what I'm going to do is similar to the adding the labware. I'm going to copy what I have over here pre-filled out. So here in this case, we have to specify our process ID, which is just a path to our process. So this is my read plate or simple read plate process, which is located in this path. What is the name of my process? So I'm just going to call it my simple read plate process. The batch count. So since I added 2 plates, I just want this to have a batch count of 2. If there's any priorities, so we're just going to set it to 1 in this case since we're just running one process. But if you have multiple processes and you want one to be prioritized over another, since Genera is dynamic and you could run both processes at the same time, you could set that priority here. And also parameters. So within the process, you could add parameter variables and you could set those variables here. So in this case, we're setting the reader protocol. So if I want this to be a dynamic in terms of what reader protocol we're going to run, we could input that as a parameter. And then we could have each plate have a different reader protocol by inputting the index here. So index 0 will have protocol 1 as the value. So this will be my plate 1. And then for plate 2, we're going to have a value of protocol 2 for the second batch.
Yeah, you take the context again, thinking about a single source of truth feeding information. You can essentially read, get plate information. Okay, the data says this. Now, what I needed to do based on that data analysis, I needed to run, in Igor's case here, reader protocol number 2. So now it knows what index it's at. It's at index 1. So it can feed this information directly, the JSON data, to Genera and say, okay, based on the information that I was able to collect from your first run in index 0, I need you to run index 1 because that's what's probably going to be a better option.
Yep. So now if I was to execute this, we can see it's going to add a task to our task table. There we go. And it's going to run. So it's going to run our first batch.
Plate 1. And it's going to run. And if you look at the variables on that workspace page or the scheduler view, it should show you.
Oh, let me move this over a little bit. Yep, so we can see if we go into the variables, as Jeff mentioned, scroll down, we can see that for batch 1, it is protocol 1, and batch 2 is protocol 2.
Very nice.
And another thing to note, that while this was running, I executed a get process task command, and we could see here that we could actually get the state of the process, and it is running. It was running when I ran this command. So you could pull the get process task to see the state of that process. And now if I was to execute it again, we can see now it's finished. So you could use the remote API to see if your process is still running. So you kind of wait until it is in the finished state before moving on to the next step of whatever you're doing with the remote API.
That's nice. So you just basically clicked that and said, get the state regardless, didn't matter?
Yep, just get the state of, this will get the state of all process tasks. So okay. If I was to run another process task, then it'll have another process in the response body that'll have either, finished, running, paused, error. And similar to the labware, we could get the process ID. And with that process ID, we could get the error if there's any process task that has an error. We just say we need to feed it the ID. We could get the specific process task with that ID. We could update the process task. We could get the process task state. We could set the process task state with that ID value. So the final thing I would like to do to wrap this up is after I'm done running my process, now I want to remove all my labware, right? So let's say a user went in there, removed the labware, and then after that, I want to remove it from my workspace. So there we have a remove all labware endpoint here. And if I was to try it out and execute, you can see that my 2 labwares that was in my ReadySoft Hotel-1 is now gone.
That's great. That's great. Hopefully that's a good idea of what you want to do. If you remove labware, I can see it cleaning up the entire operation at the end of your process. Physically, yes, you still have to remove these plates, but electronically, Genera doesn't know that they exist anymore. And now you can remove those physically, take them to the next downstream process, or if that is the final process, considering this was a read, that whatever those plates have done to them, you move forward from there. But you've basically cleaned up Genera for the next set of runs, essentially.
Yeah, and if I only want to remove specific labware, I could remove the labware based off the ID that I get from getting all the labware states. So it's flexible in removing all the labware or just specific ones that I used for this run.
Yeah, and using the ID is unique for each piece of labware, which is nice, as opposed to the microplate -96. Well, I don't know which one that is, right? It's like Genera doesn't know, but if you give it the ID, it knows exactly where it is and what it's called, and if it has that specific barcode, which is nice.
Exactly.
So this is really cool. This really extends the power of Genera when you think about it from the standpoint of you're developing your own overlay. We've had customers who do this already. They're using remote API. Genera's down below, if you will, with an upper level crust of UIs that they've created for their own internal colleagues, which they're very familiar with. But they use this backend and the remote API to access Genera, feed it the information that's necessary, and run the process as normal. Yes, there will take some time to, like Igor had to do a setup on this particular reader, but you're feeding it the information that it needs in order to process. Protocol 1, Protocol 2. There you go. It's right into the reader variable, if you will. And if you go back to the process itself, Igor, and that should be a parameter variable, right? For the
So if I
reader.
go into variables.
There you go, reader protocol. And that's selected under the read plate activity, correct?
Yeah.
There it is. Yes. So reader protocol fed directly from remote API information that he had, or in the case of third-party development, you might have coming from your limbs, which is fantastic. It gives you all sorts of flexibility to control Genera in different ways to make yourself more productive. Well, Igor, that does it for this episode. I appreciate all the information you provided, and I hope that our users will find it informative as well. Until the next time, have a good day.